What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors sits down for what should be a simple morning chat show interview, only to face a host whose line of questioning crosses every professional boundary? In just 46 seconds, a routine conversation spiraled into one of the most uncomfortable moments in British television history, leaving viewers stunned, and the host scrambling to maintain control as her guest walked off set. This is the story of how Lorraine Kelly turned what should have been a pleasant promotional appearance into a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview. Hugh Grant arrived at the studio that morning expecting nothing more than the typical promotional circuit chat. His new film had just been released and, like countless times before, he was making the rounds on various talk shows to discuss his latest project. The mood in the studio seemed light and friendly as Hugh took his seat across from Lorraine Kelly, who was flanked by two other panel members, television presenter Ben Shepherd and entertainment journalist Sarah Green. The stage was set for what producers likely hoped would be an engaging 20-minute segment filled with charming anecdotes and laughter. From the very first question, however, something felt distinctly off. Lorraine Kelly leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and opened with a comment that immediately put Hugh on the defensive. "Well, Hugh, lovely to have you here," Lorraine began, her voice dripping with a tone that suggested the opposite. "Though I must say you don't exactly have the best reputation when it comes to doing these sorts of interviews, do you? Bit of a reluctant guest, aren't you?" The smile on Hugh's face flickered for just a moment. He shifted in his seat, clearly taken aback by such an opening salvo. Ben Shepherd and Sarah Green exchanged uncomfortable glances, but neither spoke up. The audience, sensing the tension, fell silent. "I wouldn't say that's entirely fair," Hugh replied diplomatically, maintaining his composure. "I think I've been perfectly pleasant in interviews over the years. I'm here to talk about the film, which I'm quite proud of, actually." But Lorraine wasn't done. Instead of pivoting to discuss the film, she doubled down. "Oh, come on now," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "We've all seen those clips of you looking absolutely miserable doing press tours. You're famous for it. Why even bother showing up if you're going to be so grumpy about it?" The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Hugh's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained measured in his response. "Lorraine, with respect, I think you're mischaracterizing things quite a bit. I take my work very seriously, and I'm here because I believe in this project and want to share it with people. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at." Sarah Green, clearly sensing the interview was going south, attempted to interject with a lighter question about the film's production, but Lorraine cut her off without even looking in her direction. "What I'm getting at," Lorraine continued, her voice taking on an edge, "is that some of us work very hard to make these shows entertaining and welcoming for our guests. And then we have celebrities who waltz in acting like doing an interview is some terrible burden they have to endure. It's quite frankly insulting to everyone involved." The studio fell into an awkward silence. Ben Shepherd looked down at his notes, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. The camera operator seemed uncertain whether to keep filming or cut away. Hugh Grant, to his credit, remained calm, though his expression had shifted from polite confusion to visible frustration. "I'm not entirely sure why you've decided to be so hostile," Hugh said quietly, his famous British politeness still intact despite the provocation. "I came here in good faith to have a conversation. If you have some sort of personal issue with me, perhaps this wasn't the right venue to air it." Lorraine let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Oh, here we go. Playing the victim now, are we? How very typical." Ben Shepherd finally found his voice. "Lorraine, maybe we should talk about the film itself." "Hugh, the trailer looked absolutely brilliant. Can you tell us about your character?" It was a valiant attempt at course correction, but Lorraine wasn't having it. She turned to Ben with a look that could freeze water. "I'm conducting this interview, Ben, thank you very much. I think we need to address the elephant in the room here. Hugh has made quite a career out of playing the charming, bumbling Englishman. But sitting here right now, I'm not seeing much charm at all. What I'm seeing is someone who thinks he's above having a real conversation." Hugh's patience was clearly wearing thin. His voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath it now. "Lorraine, I've been nothing but respectful since I sat down. You, on the other hand, have been needlessly antagonistic from the moment you opened your mouth. I don't know what kind of interview you thought you were going to have today, but this certainly isn't it. I came here to discuss a film I'm passionate about, not to be personally attacked." Sarah Green nodded sympathetically. "He's right, Lorraine. This has gotten way off track. Let's just reset and talk about the actual film. Hugh, I'd love to hear about working with the director. But Lorraine's face had flushed red, and it was clear she wasn't backing down. If anything, the pushback seemed to embolden her. She leaned forward even more aggressively, pointing a finger at Hugh. Personally attacked, that's rich. You know what, Hugh? The problem with people like you is that you've been told you're wonderful for so long that you can't handle even the slightest bit of honest questioning. You come on shows like mine expecting everyone to fawn all over you, and when someone dares to push back even a little bit, you act like you're being persecuted. Well, I've got news for you. This is my show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want. The words hung in the air like poison. Hugh Grant sat very still for a moment, and anyone watching could see him making a decision. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet but firm. You're absolutely right, Lorraine. It is your show, which means you can continue it without me. He stood up and the studio erupted into chaos. Producers rushed onto the set from the wings, trying to figure out what was happening. Ben Shepherd reached out as if to stop Hugh, saying something along the lines of, Hugh, please, let's just take a moment. But Hugh was already removing his microphone. Lorraine, seemingly shocked that her guest was actually leaving, scrambled to regain control of the situation. Her confident, aggressive demeanor crumbled in an instant. Oh, don't be ridiculous, she said, her voice suddenly much less certain. You're really going to walk out over a few simple questions? How incredibly unprofessional. Hugh turned back to face her, and his response was measured but devastating. What's unprofessional is ambushing a guest with personal attacks instead of doing your job as an interviewer. I've done hundreds of these interviews over the years, and I've never been treated with such disrespect. You had every opportunity to have a pleasant, engaging conversation, and you chose hostility instead. That's on you, not me. Sarah Green spoke up, her voice sympathetic. Hugh, for what it's worth, I think you've handled this with remarkable grace. I'm sorry this happened, Hugh nodded at her gratefully. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that. By now, a producer had appeared at Lorraine's side, whispering urgently in her ear. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every mortifying second of the meltdown. Lorraine's face cycled through several emotions at once. Confusion, anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been panic, as she realized just how badly this had gone. This is absolutely absurd, Lorraine said, though her voice had lost all its earlier bite. We're in the middle of a live broadcast. You can't just leave. Watch me, Hugh replied simply. Ben Shepherd made one last attempt at salvaging the situation. Hugh, I understand you're upset, and frankly, I don't blame you, but maybe we could all just take a breath, reset, and start fresh. We really would love to hear about the film. Hugh looked at Ben with genuine regret. Ben, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this ship has sailed. I have too much respect for myself and for the people who worked on this film to sit here and be treated like this. Lorraine made it very clear what kind of interview she wanted to have. And it's not one I'm interested in participating in. He turned to the studio audience, many of whom looked just as uncomfortable as everyone on the panel. I apologize to all of you for this. I really did come here hoping to have a nice chat about a film I'm very proud of. Unfortunately, that wasn't in the cards today. As Hugh walked toward the exit, Lorraine seemed to finally grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Her earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate attempt to shift blame. Well, there you have it, folks, she said, trying to inject some levity into her voice but failing miserably. Some people just can't handle real journalism. This is what happens when celebrities get too used to softball questions and endless praise. They throw tantrums and storm off the moment anyone challenges them. But the damage was done, and everyone watching knew it. Sarah Green looked mortified, shaking her head slightly. Ben Shepherd refused to make eye contact with Lorraine. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, clearly sympathetic to Hugh rather than their host. The producer, who had been whispering to Lorraine moments earlier, now looked ready to have a stroke. Hugh paused at the edge of the set, and for a moment, it seemed like he might say something else. Instead, he simply gave a slight nod to Ben and Sarah, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both disappointment and forgiveness, and then he was gone. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Lorraine tried to continue, launching into a prepared segment about another topic entirely, but her voice was shaky and her composure shot. Ben Shepherd and Sarah Green attempted to support her, but their hearts clearly weren't in it. The energy in the studio had shifted completely from what should have been upbeat morning television to something that felt more like watching a car crash in slow motion. What made the entire situation even more striking was Hugh Grant's remarkable restraint throughout the ordeal. Despite being blindsided by hostility from the moment he sat down, he never raised his voice. His voice never resorted to insults and never lost its composure. He responded to every provocation with measured, articulate replies, giving Lorraine multiple opportunities to change course. Even his decision to leave was communicated with dignity and professionalism. He didn't storm off or slam anything. He simply calmly chose not to subject himself to further disrespect. Lorraine Kelly, by contrast, demonstrated almost everything an interviewer should never do. She opened with antagonism rather than warmth. She made the interview about herself and her grievances instead of her guest and his work. She dismissed attempts by her fellow panel members to course correct. She escalated instead of de-escalating when tensions rose, and perhaps most damningly, when her guest finally had enough and left, she tried to paint herself as the victim of some unreasonable celebrity tantrum, refusing to acknowledge any responsibility for the disaster she had created. The contrast between Hugh's graciousness under pressure and Lorraine's aggressive entitlement could not have been starker. Here was a man who had every right to be upset, who had been ambushed and insulted on live television, and yet he maintained his dignity throughout. And here was a host who had all the power in the situation, control of her own show, home turf advantage, support staff at her beck and call. And she used that power to bully and belittle someone who had done nothing to deserve it. As the remaining minutes of the show limped toward their conclusion, with Lorraine trying desperately to act like nothing was wrong while Ben and Sarah looked like they wanted to be anywhere else, viewers at home and in the studio were left with one overwhelming impression. They had just witnessed a masterclass in how to conduct oneself with grace under fire, delivered by Hugh Grant, and they had witnessed a cautionary tale about the dangers of ego and entitlement in journalism, delivered by Lorraine Kelly. The 46 seconds Lorraine needed to completely derail what should have been a simple promotional interview became one of the most discussed moments in talk show history. Not because of any shocking revelation or brilliant wit, but because it perfectly captured the difference between someone who understands professionalism and someone who fundamentally does not. Hugh Grant, the supposed reluctant interview subject, the man Lorraine had accused of being difficult and temperamental, had shown himself to be nothing of the sort. He was patient, polite, and willing to engage right up until the moment when continuing to do so would have required him to abandon his self-respect. Lorraine Kelly, meanwhile, revealed herself to be exactly the kind of interviewer that makes celebrities dread promotional tours. Someone more interested in creating drama than facilitating conversation, someone who mistakes aggressive questioning for journalistic integrity, someone who, when given the opportunity to interview one of Britain's most beloved actors about a project he was passionate about, chose instead to air what seemed like personal grievances and demonstrate her own self-importance. The incident served as a reminder that being a good interviewer isn't about being tough or uncompromising. It's about creating an environment where interesting conversations can happen. It's about balancing genuine curiosity with respect for your guest. It's about knowing when to push and when to pull back. It's about remembering that the interview isn't about you, the host. It's about the person you're interviewing and what they have to share. Hugh Grant understood all of this implicitly. Lorraine Kelly in that moment understood none of it. And in trying to paint Hugh as difficult, entitled, and unprofessional, she succeeded only in demonstrating that those adjectives applied much more accurately to herself. The intended victim became the victor through nothing more than maintaining his dignity, while the aggressor became the story's villain through her own actions. The empty chair where Hugh Grant had been sitting just minutes before became the most powerful image of the entire broadcast. It wasn't a symbol of a celebrity tantrum or an actor's fragile ego. It was a symbol of what happens when a professional decides that their time and dignity are more valuable than tolerating abuse. It was a reminder that no amount of fame or opportunity obligates anyone to sit still while being disrespected. And it was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up and walk away. Ben Shefford and Sarah Green, caught in the crossfire of a conflict they neither created nor wanted any part of, handled themselves as well as could be expected. Ben's attempts to redirect the conversation back to the film showed genuine concern for both Hugh and the quality of the show. Sarah's quiet support for Hugh and her visible discomfort with Lorraine's approach demonstrated a professional solidarity that stood in sharp contrast to the host's behavior. Both of them seemed to understand what Lorraine did not, that this wasn't going to end well, and that the person being unreasonable wasn't Hugh Grant. But despite their best efforts, they couldn't save the segment. Once Lorraine had set the confrontational tone, once she made it clear that she was more interested in scoring points than having a conversation, the outcome was inevitable. Hugh Grant was always going to leave. The only question was whether he would do so immediately or give her more opportunities to course correct. He chose the latter, showing far more patience than most people would have in the same situation. The studio audience's reaction told its own story, the lack of applause or support for Lorraine when Hugh left. The uncomfortable silence that filled the space where laughter and engagement should have been. The palpable sense that everyone watching knew they had just witnessed something that shouldn't have happened. Something that reflected poorly on the show and its host, not on the guest who had been driven away. In those 46 seconds when everything fell apart, when years of conducting interviews and building a show's reputation were undone by poor judgment and worse behavior, Lorraine Kelly had a choice. She could have recognized she'd started down the wrong path and corrected course. She could have acknowledged that her approach was unnecessarily hostile and offered Hugh a genuine reset. She could have listened to her fellow panel members who were clearly trying to steer things back to productive territory. Instead, she doubled down, escalated, and ultimately drove her guest off the set. And when Hugh Grant made the decision to leave, when he calmly explained why he was doing so and apologized to the audience for the awkwardness, Lorraine still couldn't see that she was the problem. Her final comments, attempting to characterize Hugh as an oversensitive celebrity who couldn't handle real questions, only further illustrated how disconnected she was from reality in that moment. Real questions are one thing. Personal attacks disguised as journalism are quite another. Hugh Grant, to his immense credit, knew the difference, even if Lorraine Kelly did not. The morning had started with such promise. A beloved actor promoting a film he was proud of. A popular talk show with a built-in audience. All the ingredients for an engaging, entertaining segment that would benefit everyone involved. And yet in the space of just a few minutes it had all gone catastrophically wrong. Not because Hugh Grant was difficult or unprofessional. Not because the format was flawed or the questions were too hard. But because one person decided to prioritize her own agenda over doing her job properly. What should have been a forgettable bit of morning television, pleasant but unremarkable, instead became a case study in everything that can go wrong when ego and entitlement overtake professionalism. It became a reminder that respect is a two-way street, and that being on your own show doesn't give you license to treat your guest poorly. It became evidence that sometimes the person who seems the most difficult in the moment is actually the one trying hardest to keep things civil. Hugh Grant's measured responses, his multiple attempts to redirect toward substantive conversation, his clear articulation of why he found the situation unacceptable, and his dignified exit all painted the picture of someone who had been pushed well past any reasonable limit. This was not a celebrity having a meltdown. This was a professional recognizing that continued participation would require him to tolerate intolerable behavior, and making the entirely rational decision not to do so. Lorraine Kelly's behavior throughout, from her hostile opening to her defensive doubling down to her desperate attempts at damage control, told a very different story. It was the story of someone who had either misread the room catastrophically or simply didn't care. Someone who thought she could score easy points by taking shots at a guest, but instead demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes for good television and good interviewing. Someone who, when called out for her behavior, responded not with reflection or apology but with further attacks. The contrast could not have been more stark or more instructive. On one side, grace under pressure, professionalism in the face of provocation, and the self-respect to walk away rather than accept mistreatment. On the other, aggressive entitlement, a refusal to acknowledge mistakes, and a willingness to burn down an interview rather than admit fault. The hero and the villain of this particular story could not have been more clearly defined, and they were the opposite of how Lorraine Kelly tried to frame them in her desperate final comments. The empty set, the uncomfortable panel members, The silent audience and the absent guest all combined to create an image that would linger long after the cameras stopped rolling. It was an image of opportunity squandered, professionalism abandoned, and dignity maintained in the face of hostility. It was 46 seconds that changed everything, not because of anything shocking or scandalous, but because it revealed the truth. The truth about who had come prepared to have a good faith conversation and who had come looking for a fight. The truth about who understood what respect means and who thought their position exempted them from needing to show it. Hugh Grant had arrived that morning as just another actor on just another promotional stop. He left as someone who reminded everyone watching that there are limits to what anyone should have to endure, regardless of how famous they are or how much their publicist wants them to play nice. He left proving that professionalism isn't about silently enduring disrespect. It's about knowing when to draw the line. Sometimes the most professional act is refusing to participate in something that has lost all integrity. Lorraine Kelly may have stayed on her set, but in truth, she lost far more than Hugh Grant did by walking away. She lost the respect of her fellow panelists, who had watched her derail what should have been a simple, friendly interview. She lost the trust of her audience, who could clearly see that the unreasonable one wasn't the guest who left. And she lost the moral high ground she tried so desperately to claim in her closing remarks, because everyone watching knew the truth of what had just happened. In the end, the story of Hugh Grant storming off Lorraine Kelly's show was never about a celebrity's attitude. It became a story about respect, boundaries, and the importance of recognizing when a situation turns toxic. It was about understanding the difference between being tough and being needlessly cruel, and about how grace and dignity will always outshine aggression and ego, even when the aggressor holds the power. For interviewers, the lesson was unmistakable. Your job isn't to dominate your guests or manufacture conflict, it's to foster meaningful conversation. For guests, the takeaway was equally clear. No amount of publicity is worth tolerating mistreatment. And for everyone else watching, it was a reminder that walking away from a bad situation isn't weakness, it's strength. Those 46 seconds transformed an ordinary morning show segment into a moment that would be remembered for years. Hugh Grant, long labeled difficult, displayed patience, composure, and quiet integrity. Lorraine Kelly, the seasoned host, revealed arrogance, hostility, and a stunning lack of self-awareness. The supporting panel members did what they could to save the exchange, and the audience sat in uneasy silence, realizing they had witnessed something that went far beyond entertainment. It was a moral contrast in real time. As Hugh's footsteps faded from the set and Lorraine struggled to regain control of the show, one truth hung heavy in the air: respect matters. Power comes with responsibility, and sometimes the greatest act of professionalism is knowing when to stand up, walk away, and let your silence say everything that needs to be said.